Section 39 of Common Sense in the Household. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne Spiegel. Common Sense in the Household, a Manual of Practical Housewifery by Marion Harland. Section 39. Servants. Some years ago, more than I care to count over, I read a lively little book entitled The Greatest Plague of Life. I have forgotten who wrote it, if I ever knew. It was in the form of an autobiography. The heroine called herself, with an amusing affection of disguise, Mrs. Sknstn, and it was illustrated by George Cruikshank. I read it aloud in my home circle, and many a hearty laugh we had over the poor lady's perplexities and calamities. Regarding the history as a clever burlesque, I suffered no appreciable draft upon my sympathies until time and experience brought me in contact with so many who echoed her plaint, that I could not but recur now and then with a half-sad smile to her sufferings under the rule of Nora, who chased her upstairs with a carving knife, with Mary, who drank up the cherry brandy, filled the bottle with cold weak tea, and kept her pitying employers up all night to pull her through an epileptic fit, with John, who never answered the parlour bell unless they pursued, whose stomach could not bear cold meat at dinner, but rallied bravely under a couple of pounds at supper. There was one nursery maid who whipped Mrs. Sknstn's child, and another who upset the perambulator in the park, and, too much absorbed in a suit of whiskered guardsmen to notice what had happened, went on dragging the carriage upon its side until the baby's cheek was cruelly scarified by the gravel, besides a host of other unworthies set for the distress of Mrs. Sknstn's mind, body, and estate. Douglas Jerrold wrote that book, interrupts a friend at my elbow, and, apropos de botte, have you seen Punch's recent article, Servantgalism, or What Shall Be Done with the Missuses? The malady in America must bear another name, remarks a lady gaily. We have no servants, at least in this region. My cook is 47 years old, and my chambermaid a widow, who has buried 2 children, yet they would be highly affronted were I to speak of them except as girls. It is a generic term that belongs to the class who live out, from 16 up to 60. I had a lesson on this head not a month since. My laundress, who has lived with me 6 years, was thanking me for a service I had done her brother. "I'll never forget you for it, mem," she sobbed. "I'll bless you for it on my knees night and morning." "I am glad I have been able to help your friends, Katie," I said. "You have been a faithful servant to me." She cut my sentence in the middle by walking out of the room, I suppose to conceal her emotions. I was undeceived 5 minutes later, when her angry tones reached me from the kitchen, the door of which she had left open. "I'll never believe a person has a good heart or deserves to be called a Christian who names an honest, respectable girl who tries to do her duty a servant. A faithful servant, says she, as if she was a queen, and myself a beggar." "What did you say to the ungrateful wretch?" asks a listener, indignantly. "Nothing. I went quietly out of hearing, reminded for the 100th time of Solomon's warning, 'Take no heed unto all words that are spoken, lest thou hear thy servant curse thee.' I recalled, too, the saying of a mightier than the royal preacher, 'Whosoever will be greatest among you, let him be your servant.'" "I thought you were one of the favored few who had no trouble with them," says another housekeeper, sighingly. "There is real comfort. Excuse me, my dear Mrs. Sterling, but it is refreshing to a wearied soul to know that you have felt some of our tribulations. It seems to me, at times, that there is no other affliction worthy the name when compared with what we endure from the necessary evil. I have tried all sorts, the representatives from every nation under heaven, I verily believe, and they are all alike. They will wear me into an untimely grave yet." "I wouldn't let them, my dear Martha," replies Mrs. Sterling, with her sunny smile. "If evils, they are surely minor afflictions. And, after all, I imagine they are a good deal like the rest of man and womankind, pretty much as you choose to take them. The truth is, there is no justice in wholesale denunciation of any class. You recollect the Western orator's truism, 'Human nature, Mr. President, 9 cases out of 10 is human nature.' When I consider the influences under which a majority of our servants have been reared, ignorance, poverty, superstition, often evil example in their homes, My wonder is, not at the worthlessness of some, but that so many are virtuous, honest, and orderly. You will allow that, as a general thing, they are quite as industrious as their mistresses, and control their tempers almost as well. And we make so many mistakes in our dealings with them. My old friend does not often lecture, but she has something to say now, and forgets herself in her subject. We err so grievously in our management that a sense of our failures should teach us charity. Do we understand, ourselves, what is the proper place of a hired help in our families? If it is the disposition of Mrs. Shoddy to trample upon them as soulless machines, Mrs. Kindly to make a sort of elder daughter of her maid, indulges, consults, and confides in her, and wonders by and by to find herself under Abigail's thumb, her husband and children subject to the caprices of a pampered menial. I never heard a lady say of a valued domestic, "I could not get along without her," without anticipating as a certainty the hour when she shall announce, "There is such a thing as keeping a servant too long." The crisis comes, then, to Mrs. Kindly. In a moment of desperation she frees her neck from the yoke. Abigail packs her 6 trunks, having entered Mrs. Kindly's service 7 years before with all her worldly all done up in a newspaper, shakes the dust off the neat Balmoral boots which have replaced her brogans, against the heartless tyrant who sits crying in her own room upstairs over thoughts of how Abigail has been so clean, quick, and devoted to her interests, how she has nursed her through a long and dangerous illness, and had the charge of Emma and Bobby from their birth. She has prepared a handsome present for her in memory of all this, and is hurt more than by anything else when she learns that the girl has taken her final departure without even kissing the baby. It is not strange that the deceived mistress should, from that day, write down Abigail as a monster of ingratitude, and forget the faithful service of years in the smart of a wounded feeling, when the truth is that she did the maid more injury by injudicious petting than the latter could do her mistress had she absconded with all the plate in the house. She has, as might have been expected, proved Abigail's unfitness to be her confidant and co-adviser, but at the same time she has filled her brain with notions of her superiority to her fellow servants, her heart with burnings for the higher station she can never occupy. I speak freely upon this subject, continues Mrs. Sterling, with a laugh, for I was once led into this very mistake myself by the attractive qualities of a young woman who lived with me 9 years as seamstress and chambermaid. She was so even-tempered, so sensible, industrious, and respectful, that she gained upon the esteem of us all. One day, while we sat together at work, I told her of some family changes in prospect, prefacing the communication by the remark, "I want to speak to you of something, Eliza, which you must not mention to anyone else at present. The interests of an employer and servant should be the same." Then, very foolishly, I opened up my mind freely on the subject that engaged it. She answered modestly but intelligently, entering into my plans with such cordial interest and pledges of cooperation, that I went to prepare for a walk, feeling really strengthened and cheered by the talk. At the front door I was met by a letter requiring an immediate reply. Returning to my chamber to lay off my hat and shawl, I heard Eliza talking loudly and gleefully in the adjoining sewing-room, with the cook, whom she must have called upstairs through the speaking-tube. You cannot imagine, nor I describe, my sensations at listening, against my will, to an exaggerated account of the interview which had just taken place. Not only my language but my tones were mimicked with great gusto and much laughter by my late confidant, the phrase, "The interests of the employer and the servant should be the same," occurring again and again, and forming, apparently, the cream of the joke. I was very angry. But for the rule adopted early in my married life, never to reprove a servant when out of humour, I should instantly have ordered the treacherous creature, as I named her, from the house. I sat down instead to cool off and to think. With reflection, common sense rallied to my aid. "The girl does well enough in her place, which is that of a hired chambermaid and seamstress," said this monitor. "She knew her position, and would have kept it, but for your folly in dragging her up to temporary equality with yourself. You made yourself ridiculous, and she was shrewd enough to see it. Take the lesson to heart, write it out in full for future guidance, and keep your own counsel." Eliza never suspected my discovery. She remained with me until her marriage a year afterward, and we parted on good terms. I have quoted from my friend at length, because I honor her excellent judgment and mature experience, and because I agree so fully with her touching the evil of so-called confidential servants. The principle of acknowledged favoritism is ruinous to domestic comfort, let who may be the object thus distinguished. Rely on it, my dear lady, At least 1/3 of home wrangles and social scandal arises from this cause. Be assured also that if you do not perceive the impropriety of lowering yourself to the level of your subordinates, they will, and gauge their behavior accordingly. The connection is an unnatural one, and, like all others of the kind, must terminate disastrously in time. Then the discarded favorite, aggrieved and exasperated, leaves your house to tattle in the ears of some other indiscreet mistress of your sayings and doings. Show your servant that you respect yourself and her too truly to forget what is due to both. Be kind, pleasant, always reasonable, and attentive to her needs, willing to hearken to and meet any lawful request. Make her comfortable and, so far as you can, happy. Excuse one more quotation from Mrs. Sterling, whom, when I was much younger than I am now, I consulted with regard to the just medium between familiarity and austerity. Remember they are human beings, and treat them as such, she said. Not that you are likely to reap a large reward in their gratitude, but because it is right, and because you find no exceptions to the practice of the golden rule laid down in the Bible. Be faithful in your obedience to the law of kindness. With the return tide you have nothing to do. This is a safe and straight path. I believe it would be also the smoothest. You will be better and more cheerfully served than your neighbor who, recognizing in every hireling a natural enemy, is always on the defensive. I have found the most serious obstacle to a comfortable pursuance of her safe path to lie in this same prejudice, rooted by centuries of misunderstandings and caste wars, the belief of necessary antagonism between employers and employed. Mrs. Sterling's Eliza only expressed the prevailing sentiment of her class when she ridiculed her mistress's proposition that their interests ought to be identical. I have failed so often and so signally in the endeavor to impress the merits of this policy upon domestics that I rarely attempt it now. There is always a suspicion, more or less apparent, that you have a single eye to self-interest in all your regulations and counsels. What does she hope to gain? What am I in danger of losing? Are the queries that invariably present themselves to the subordinate's mind. The arguments by which your plans are supported are thrown away upon ignorant and illogical listeners. Your array of facts totally disbelieved. Your auditor does not say this, but in divers and ingenious ways she contrives to let you know that she is not so silly as to be imposed upon by the specious array of evidence. For how much of this are mistresses responsible? Has this creed of distrust been learned by experience of injustice or exaction, or is it one of the popular prejudices, which are harder to overthrow than sound and well-established principle? Of one thing I am certain. Mistresses and maids would more speedily come to a right understanding of oneness of interest, but for the influence exerted over the former by Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Robinson, and Mrs. Brown, who don't allow this, and couldn't think of that, and never heard of the other privilege or immunity being granted to servants. Before they would yield such a point, or submit to one syllable of dictation, they would do all their own work, etc., etc. Poor Mrs. Pliable, listening dumbly and meekly, goes home with a low-spirited sense of her own pusillanimity upon her, and tries to assert her authority and redeem past faults by a sudden tightening of the reins that results in a runaway and general smash-up. Cannot we remember, you and I, my dear reader, that we may sometimes be as nearly right as those who talk more loudly and strongly than we upon domestic economy, laying down rules we never thought of suggesting, splitting into ninths a hair our short-sighted eyes cannot make out when whole, and annihilating our timid objections with a lordly, "I always do so," which is equal to a decree of infallibility? Can we not make up our minds once and for all to be a law unto ourselves in all matters pertaining to our households? Mrs. Jones's rules may be good for her, Mrs. Robinson's better than any other in her particular case, and Mrs. Brown's best of all for one of her peculiar circumstances, yet any one or all of them be unsuitable for our use. Avoid talking about your domestic affairs with people whose gossip on these topics is incessant. You are angry when a whiff of some such discussion as enlightened Mrs. Sterling, with regard to her mistake, is wafted to you through the dumb waiter or register, an accident that will occur while the tones of the plaintiffs are loud and untrained by education or policy. It is mean and unkind, traitorous, in fact, you say, for them to so misrepresent and revile you. After all the kindness you have showed to them, too. Bridget, Chloe, or Gretchen, passing the parlor door and catching the sound of her name, as roughly handled, may have her own sensations and draw her own inferences, being human like yourself. It is tiresome and vulgar, this everlasting exchange of experiences about my girl and your girl and everybody else's girl. It is time sensible women ceased, in this respect, to imitate the fashion of the class they censure, and put down the bootless tattle with a strong will. Order your household, then, so far aright as you can by the help of common sense and grace from on high, and let Madameses Jones, Robinson, and Brown look to the ways of their own, and expend their surplus energies upon their neighbors' concerns, counting you out. I believe that is slang, but let it stand. These worthy and fussy housewives act upon the supposition that all girls are cast in the same mold. Being human, do not let us forget that. The probability is that there are varieties of the species. But if the mistresses are led by their associates, the girls' acquaintances sway her yet more powerfully. Every conscientious, well-meaning housewife knows what a break is this informal but terrible union upon her endeavors to improve and really benefit those under her direction. I have been amazed and disgusted at the tyranny exercised by this irresponsible body over the best servants I have ever seen. We would be hooted at, ma'am, if we didn't give in to them, said one, when I represented how senseless and almost suicidal was the course recommended by these evil advisers. There's not a girl in the town would speak to us if we didn't join with the rest. It's like a strike, you see, awful upon them as holds back. Do not, then, my discouraged fellow laborer, imagine that I am ignorant of your trials, your doubts, your disheartening experiences. If I disagree with Mrs. SKN, and do not pronounce our servants to be the greatest plague of life, inclining rather to the belief that, always allowing for human nature and the drawbacks I have enumerated, good mistresses are apt to make good servants, it is in consequence of long and careful study and observation of the practical workings of Mrs. Stirling's rule. Like begets like. Pleasant words are more likely to be answered by pleasant than are tart or hasty ones. If you would have your servants respectful to you, be respectful to them. The best way to teach them politeness is by example. It should not cost you an effort to say thank you or if you please. The habit exerts an unconscious refining influence upon them, and you dignify instead of degrading your ladyhood by being pitiful and courteous to all. If you can only maintain your position by haughtiness and chilling disregard of the feelings of inferiors, your rank is false, or you unfit to hold it. To begin, then, be mistress of yourself, amid all your temptations to angry or sarcastic speech, and how many and how strong these are, you and I know. Curb yourself with the recollection that it is despicable, no less than useless, to say cutting things to one who has no right to retort upon you in kind. Ma, says Miss Aurelia, in Miss Sedgwick's admirable story, live and let live. How can you let your help be so saucy to you? Mr. Julius, who was standing by, took a different view of the matter. If Ma doesn't want her help to be saucy to her, he said, she hadn't ought to be sarcy to them. Teach your children the like forms of kindly speech and habits of consideration for the comfort and happiness of your domestics, checking with equal promptness undue freedom and the arrogance of station. It is as graceful to bend as it is mean to grovel. Learn not to see everything, and, so soon as you can, put far from you the delusive hope that anybody else, unless it be dear old John, will ever serve you as well as you would serve yourself. This failure is attributable to some of the 9/10 we spoke of just now. She is a prudent housekeeper who can wink at trifling blemishes without effort or parade. There is one text which has come into my troubled mind hundreds of times on such occasions, calming perturbation into solemnity, and bringing, I hope, charity with humility. If thou, Lord, shouldst mark iniquities, O Lord, who should stand? But if your hold of the rein be gentle, let it also be firm. Never forget that the house is yours, and that you, not hirelings, are responsible for the disposition of the stores purchased with John's money. I was much amused the other day, said an easy-tempered lady to me, at a talk that passed under my window between my new cook and one of her visitors. "And how are you getting along?" asked the guest. "Oh, pretty wellish now," was the reply. "I was afeard, when I first come, that she would bother me a-trotting down into the kitchen so constant. But I give her a hint as how that wasn't the trick of a rael lady, and she's kept out nicely since then. You got to stand up for your own rights in this world, or you'll be trod upon. Now, It would be throwing away words to reason with a woman like that cook, or a mistress might show that in no other department of labor would such a principle be tolerated. That from the Secretary of State down to the scavenger who empties your ashpan, every employee who draws wages has an overlooker to whom he is accountable for the manner in which his work is done and his money earned, and that the fact that she is an ignorant, high-tempered woman is no just cause of exemption. Yet in how many families is this point tacitly yielded, and the mistress admitted upon sufferance to her own kitchen, the room furnished with her money, and in which she hardly dare touch or look at the articles intended for the consumption of her own family? One often hears such remarks as, "It isn't every girl who will stand having the mistress popping in and out while she is at work," when in any other situation the very fact of this unwillingness to have the owner of the materials used in that work present would be a strong presumptive proof of negligence or dishonesty. The principle is pernicious from beginning to end, and should not be tolerated for an instant. It gives me pleasure to state here that I know nothing personally of this curious reversal of the rights of employer and domestic. I am inclined to believe, if one half I hear of other housewives' trials be true, that I have been highly favored among American women. My authority in the kitchen, as in other parts of the household, has never been disputed, in my hearing or presence, that is. I have always met with a cheerful reception below stairs when I appeared there to direct or share the labors of my cooks. I found them willing to undertake new dishes, and ready to learn my way, however unlike it may be to their own. As a rule, also, to which the exceptions have been few and very far between, those employed by me have been cleanly, industrious, kind-hearted, and respectful, patient under inconveniences, and attentive in sickness. I should not, therefore, do my duty did I not lift my voice in a plea for charitable judgment, just and generous treatment of a class which, however faulty, have much to do and to endure. Mrs. Skinflint's grocer's account may be less than yours, if you adopt this policy. Mrs. Sharp's coal cellar be better dusted, and the paint in her attic scrubbed oftener, but I believe in the long run you will be the most comfortable in body as in conscience. Your machinery will move with fewer jerks and less friction. Your servants will remain with you longer and be better tempered while they stay, if you show that you appreciate the fact of a common humanity, that you owe them the duties you are resolved to fulfill during their sojourn under your roof, however mercenary may be their performance of those devolving upon them. Finally, dear sister, do not add to the real miseries of life by regarding the annoyance of a careless, slothful, or impertinent domestic as a real trouble. Class it with petty vexations which are yet curable as well as endurable, and live above it, a noble, beneficent existence in the love of your fellow creatures and the fear of God. A life that cannot suffer perceptible disturbance from such a contemptible rootlet of bitterness as this. It is only the feeble, the inefficient, or the indolent mistress whose peace of mind is dependent upon such casualties as a breeze, a hurricane, or a sudden vacancy in the Department of the Interior. Recollect, when the infliction is sharpest, that briar pricks are disagreeable, but never serious, unless the blood be very impure. End of section 39. Section 40 of Common Sense in the Household. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne. Common Sense in the Household, a Manual of Practical Housewifery by Marion Harland. Puddings, Part 1. I have, for convenience sake, classed among pies all preparations baked in crust in a pie dish. Many of these, however, are called puddings, such as custards of various kinds, lemon, cocoanut, and orange puddings. The reader will have no trouble in finding the receipts for these if she will bear the above remark in mind. Baked puddings. Beat your eggs very light, and, if you put in only one or two, whip white and yolk separately, beating the latter into the sugar before adding the whites. Fruit, rice, cornstarch, and bread puddings require a steady, moderate oven in baking. Custard and batter puddings should be put into the dish, and this into the oven, the instant they are mixed, and baked quickly. No pudding, unless it be raised with yeast, should be allowed to stand out of the oven after the ingredients are put together. Give one final hard stir just before it goes in, and make sure the mold is well greased. Apple meringue pudding. 1 pint stewed apples, 3 eggs, whites and yolks separate, 1/2 cup white sugar and 1 teaspoonful butter, 1 teaspoonful nutmeg and cinnamon mixed, 1 teaspoon essence of bitter almond for the meringue. Sweeten and spice, and while the apple is still very hot, stir in the butter and, a little at a time, the yolks. Beat all light, pour into a buttered dish, and bake 10 minutes. Cover, without drawing from the oven, with meringue made of the beaten whites, 2 tablespoonfuls of white sugar, and the bitter almond seasoning. Spread smoothly and quickly, close the oven again, and brown very slightly. Eat cold with white sugar sifted over the top, and send around cream to pour over it instead of sauce. Baked apple pudding. 6 large firm pippins, grated. 3 tablespoonfuls butter. 1/2 cup sugar. 4 eggs, whites and yolks separate. Juice of 1 lemon and half the peel. Beat butter and sugar to a cream. Stir in the yolks, the lemon, and the grated apple, lastly the whites. Grate nutmeg over the top, and bake until nicely browned. Eat cold with cream. Sweet apple pudding. 1 quart milk, 4 eggs, 3 cups chopped apple, 1 lemon, all the juice and half the rind, nutmeg and cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of soda dissolved in a little vinegar, flour for a stiff batter. Beat the yolks very light, add the milk, seasoning, and flour, stir hard 5 minutes, and beat in the apple, then the whites, lastly the soda, well mixed in. Bake in 2 square shallow pans 1 hour, and eat hot with sweet sauce. Much of the success of this pudding depends upon the mixing, almost as much upon the baking. Cover with paper when half done to prevent hardening. Pippin pudding. 8 fine pippins, pared, cored, and sliced, breaking them as little as possible. 1/2 cup very fine breadcrumbs. 2 teaspoonfuls butter, melted. 5 eggs, whites and yolks separate. 3/4 cup sugar. 1 ounce citron, shred finely. 1 teaspoonful nutmeg, and a dozen whole cloves. 1 cup milk or cream. Soak the breadcrumbs in the milk, cream the butter and sugar, and beat into this the yolks. Next, adding the milk and soaked bread, stir until very smooth and light. Pour in the nutmeg and citron, and whip in the whites lightly. Butter a deep dish, and put in your sliced apple, sprinkling each piece well with sugar, and scattering the cloves among them. Pour the custard you have prepared over them, and bake 3/4 of an hour. Sift powdered sugar over the top, and eat cold. Brown Betty. 1 cup breadcrumbs, 2 cups chopped apples, tart, 1/2 cup sugar, 1 teaspoonful cinnamon, 2 tablespoonfuls butter cut into small bits. Butter a deep dish, and put a layer of the chopped apple at the bottom. Sprinkle with sugar, a few bits of butter, and cinnamon. Cover with breadcrumbs, then more apple. Proceed in this order until the dish is full, having a layer of crumbs at top. Cover closely and steam 3/4 of an hour in a moderate oven, then uncover and brown quickly. Eat warm with sugar and cream or sweet sauce. This is a homely but very good pudding, especially for the children's table. Serve in the dish in which it is baked. Apple batter pudding. 1 pint rich milk, 2 cups flour, 4 eggs, 1 teaspoonful salt, 1/4 teaspoonful soda dissolved in hot water. Peel and core 8 apples carefully, and range them closely together in a deep dish. Beat the batter very light and pour over them. Unless the apples are very ripe and sweet, for tart apples, fill the center of each with white sugar. Bake an hour and eat hot with sweet sauce. Apple and plum pudding. 3/4 pound fine tart apples, pared and chopped, 3/4 pound sugar, 3/4 pound flour, 1/2 pound beef suet, rubbed fine, 3/4 pound raisins, seeded and chopped, 6 eggs, 1 teaspoonful nutmeg, and the same powdered cloves, 1 teaspoonful salt, 1/2 glass brown sherry, and the same of brandy. Stir the beaten yolks and sugar very light. Add the suet and apples with the spice, then the raisins well dredged with flour. Next the flour, and when this is all in, the liquor. Lastly, the whites beaten very stiff. Bake in 2 buttered molds, in a moderate oven, an hour and a half at least. Eat hot with sauce. You may boil this pudding if you like. Apple and tapioca pudding. 1 teacupful tapioca, 6 apples, juicy and well-flavored pippins, pared and cored. 1 quart water, 1 teaspoonful salt. Cover the tapioca with 3 cups of lukewarm water and set it in a tolerably warm place to soak 5 or 6 hours, stirring now and then. Pack your apples in a deep dish, adding a cup of lukewarm water. Cover closely and steam in a moderate oven until soft all through, turning them as they cook at bottom. If the dish is more than a quarter full of liquid, turn some of it out before you pour the soaked tapioca over all. Unless your apples are very sweet, fill the center with sugar and stick a clove in each, just before you cover with the tapioca. Indeed, I always do this. It softens the hard acid of the fruit. Bake, after the tapioca goes in, 1 hour. Eat warm with sweet hard sauce. Baked apple dumplings. 1 quart flour, 2 tablespoonsful lard or half butter is better. 2 cups of milk, 1 teaspoonful soda dissolved in hot water. 2 teaspoonfuls cream of tartar sifted into the dry flour. 1 saltspoonful salt. Chop the shortening into the flour after you have sifted this and the cream tartar together. Put in the soda and wet up quickly, just stiff enough to roll into a paste less than half an inch thick. Cut into squares. Lay in the center of each a juicy tart apple, pared and cored. Bring the corners of the square neatly together and pinch them slightly. Lay in a buttered baking pan, the joined edges downward, and bake to a fine brown. When done, brush over with beaten egg, and set back in the oven to glaze for 2 or 3 minutes. Sift powdered sugar over them, and eat hot with rich sweet sauce. I greatly prefer the above simple crust for all kinds of dumplings to the rich paste which becomes so heavy as soon as it begins to cool. It is also more quickly and easily made, and far more wholesome than pastry. Tapioca pudding. 1 cup tapioca, 1 quart milk, 5 eggs, whites and yolks beaten separately, 2 tablespoonsful butter, melted, 2 tablespoonsful sugar. Soak the tapioca in enough cold water to cover it, 2 hours. Drain off the water, if it be not all absorbed. Soak 2 hours longer in the milk, which should be slightly warmed. When the tapioca is quite soft, beat the sugar and butter together. Add the yolks, the milk and tapioca, lastly the whites. Stir very well and bake in a buttered dish. Eat warm with sweet sauce. You may make sago pudding in the same way. Cornstarch pudding. 4 tablespoonsful cornstarch, 1 quart milk, 4 eggs, whites and yolks separate, 3/4 cup sugar, nutmeg and cinnamon, 1 tablespoonful of butter. Dissolve the cornstarch in a little cold milk, and having heated the rest of the milk to boiling, stir this in and boil 3 minutes, stirring all the time. Remove from the fire, and while still very hot, put in the butter. Set away until cold. Beat the eggs very light, the sugar and seasonings with them, and stir into the cornstarch, beating thoroughly into a smooth custard. Turn into a buttered dish, and bake half an hour. Eat cold with powdered sugar sifted over it. Cornstarch meringue. 5 eggs, 1 quart of milk, 3/4 cup sugar, 4 teaspoonfuls cornstarch, 1/2 cup fruit jelly or jam. Heat the milk to boiling, and stir in the cornstarch which has previously been dissolved in a little cold milk. Boil 15 minutes, stirring all the while. Remove from the fire, and while still hot, add gradually the yolks of the eggs beaten up with the sugar and seasoned with vanilla, lemon, or bitter almond. Pour this into a buttered pudding dish and bake 15 minutes or until the custard begins to set. Without withdrawing it further than the door of the oven, spread lightly and quickly upon this a meringue of the whites, whipped up stiff with half a cup jelly, added gradually. Use crabapple jelly if bitter almond has been put into the custard, currant for vanilla, strawberry or other sweet conserve if you season the custard with lemon. Bake covered for 5 minutes. Then remove the lid and brown the meringue very slightly. Eat cold with powdered sugar sifted thickly over the top. Arrowroot pudding is made according to either of the foregoing receipts, substituting arrowroot for cornstarch. Farina pudding also. Bread pudding. 1 quart of milk, 2 cups of fine breadcrumbs, always stale and dry, 4 eggs, 2 tablespoonsful melted butter, nutmeg to taste, 1/4 teaspoonful soda dissolved in hot water. Beat the yolks very light, and having soaked the breadcrumbs well in the milk, stir these together. then the butter and seasoning, with the soda, lastly the whites. Bake to a fine brown and eat hot with pudding sauce. This, if well mixed and baked, is quite a different dish from the traditional and much despised bread pudding of stingy housekeepers and boarding-house landladies, which, says an English Josh Billings, nothing can be more promiscuous than a boarding-house bread pudding. Try mine instead, putting all the sugar into the sauce, and enough there, you will cease to sneer. You may boil this pudding, if you like, in a floured cloth or buttered mold. Fruit bread pudding. 1 quart milk, 5 eggs, 2 tablespoonsful melted butter, 2 tablespoons heaping sugar, 1/4 pound raisins seeded and chopped, 1/4 pound currants well washed and picked over, handful of shred citron, and 1 teaspoonful of soda dissolved in hot water, 2 scant cups fine bread crumbs from a stale loaf. Beat the yolks light with the sugar, add the bread crumbs when they have been well soaked in the milk, and stir until smooth. Next put in the fruit well dredged with flour, the soda, and finally the whites, whipped to a stiff froth. This will require longer and steadier baking than if the fruit were not in. Cover it if it threatens to harden too soon on top. Send to the table hot in the dish in which it was baked, or turn out very carefully upon a hot plate. Eat warm with pudding sauce. Bread and butter pudding. 4 eggs, 3 cups milk, 3/4 cup sugar, vanilla or other extract, nutmeg to taste, bread and butter. Cut thin slices of bread, stale, spread thickly with butter, and sprinkle with sugar. Fit them neatly and closely into a buttered pudding dish until it is half full. Lay a small heavy plate upon them to prevent them from floating, and saturate them gradually with a hot custard made of the milk, heated almost to boiling, then taken from the fire, and the beaten eggs and sugar stirred in with the seasoning. Let the bread soak in this 15 minutes or so, adding by degrees all the custard. Just before you put the pudding in the oven, take up the plate gently. If the bread still rise to the top, keep down with a silver fork or spoon laid upon it from the side of the dish, until the custard thickens, when slip it out. Eat cold. Bread and marmalade pudding is made precisely as above, except that each slice is spread with marmalade or jam besides the butter. Either of these puddings is good boiled. Alice's pudding. 1 quart of milk, 4 eggs, 1 cup very fine dry breadcrumbs, 1/2 cup strawberry or other sweet jam, 1/2 cup sugar. Butter a pudding dish, sprinkle the bottom with breadcrumbs, pour over these 1/2 cup of jam, and cover this well with the rest of the crumbs. Wet with a very little milk. Heat the quart of milk until near boiling. Take it from the fire and add, gradually, the beaten yolks and sugar, stirring in the beaten whites lightly at the last. Heat this by degrees, stirring constantly until it begins to thicken. Put it, spoonful by spoonful, upon the layer of breadcrumbs, taking care not to disturb these, and when all is in, bake until well set and very slightly browned. Eat cold. Cream is a delicious accompaniment to it. The Queen of Puddings. 1/2 cup white sugar, 2 cups fine dry breadcrumbs, 5 eggs, 1 tablespoonful of butter, vanilla, rosewater, or lemon seasoning, 1 quart fresh rich milk, and 1/2 cup jelly or jam. Rub the butter into a cup of sugar. Beat the yolks very lightly, and stir these together to a cream. The breadcrumbs soaked in milk come next, then the seasoning. Bake this in a buttered pudding dish, a large one and but 2/3 full, until the custard is set. Draw to the mouth of the oven. Spread over with jam or other nice fruit conserve. Cover this with a meringue made of the whipped whites and 1/2 cup of sugar. Shut the oven and bake until the meringue begins to color. Eat cold with cream. You may, in strawberry season, substitute the fresh fruit for preserves. It is then truly delightful. Cracker pudding. 1 quart milk, 1 cup powdered cracker, 5 eggs, 2 tablespoonsful melted butter, 1/2 teaspoonful soda dissolved in boiling water. Heat the milk slightly, and pouring it over the cracker, let them stand together 15 minutes. Stir into this first the beaten yolks, then the butter and soda. Beat all smooth and add the whipped whites. Eat hot with pudding sauce. Dorchester cracker plum pudding. 2 quarts milk, 6 Boston crackers, split and buttered, 8 eggs, beaten very light, 2 cups sugar, nutmeg, cloves, and cinnamon to taste, 1 teaspoonful of salt, 1 pound raisins, seeded and cut in two. Make a custard of the milk, eggs, and sugar seasoned with the spices, by heating the milk almost to boiling, then taking it from the fire and adding gradually the yolks, sugar, seasoning, and whites. Do not boil it again. Butter a pudding dish. Put a layer of crackers in the bottom, moistening with a few spoonfuls of hot custard. On this lay some of the raisins, a thick stratum. Cover with crackers, the buttered side downward, moisten with the custard, and proceed in this order until your crackers and fruit are used up. Pour in custard only until the top of the upper layer is visible, but not enough to float them. Cover closely, and set in the cellar overnight. In the morning add the rest of the custard, at intervals of 5 or 6 minutes between the cupfuls. Bake 2 hours in a moderate oven. Cover with paper if it should seem likely to harden too fast. Eat hot with sauce. Cracker suet pudding. 1/4 pound beef suet, freed from strings and powdered. 1 cup fine cracker crumbs. 2 tablespoonsful sugar. 4 eggs. 3 cups milk. Pinch of soda. Teaspoonful of salt. Beat the yolks with the sugar. Add to these the milk in which the cracker has been soaked for half an hour. Work into a smooth paste before putting in the suet and soda. Whip the whites in last, and bake nearly, if not quite, an hour. Cover, should the crust form too rapidly. Eat hot, with wine sauce. You may also steam or boil this pudding. Fruit cracker pudding. 1 cup powdered cracker soaked in 1 pint of milk. 1/4 cup beef suet, cleared from strings and powdered. 1/2 pound raisins, seeded and cut in two. 1/4 pound currants, washed and dried. 3 ounces of almonds, 5 eggs, 1/2 cup sugar, 1 teaspoonful nutmeg, and same of cinnamon, rose water to taste. Blanch the almonds and cut with a sharp knife into thin shavings. Beat the yolks with the sugar until light and thick. Mix in the cracker and milk, the suet and the fruit well dredged, the spice and rose water, then the whipped whites, finally the almonds. Bake in a buttered mold 1 hour and a half. Turn out and eat with wine sauce. Or, boil in a well-buttered mold. In this case, blanch but do not cut the almonds, and do not stone the raisins. Butter the mold so thickly that you can stick the almonds to the sides in regular rows, alternately with rows of whole raisins. Put in the mixture gently, not to disturb these. Cover the mold and boil or steam 3 hours. Treat it in this way, it makes a pretty-looking pudding. It is palatable in any shape. Cracker and jam pudding. 3 eggs, 1/2 cup cracker crumbs, 1/2 cup sugar, 1 tablespoonful butter, 1 teacup milk, 1/2 lemon, juice and grated rind, 3 tablespoonsful jam. Soak the cracker in the milk. Rub the butter and sugar together, adding the lemon and beating to a cream, then stir in the beaten yolks, next the cracker and milk, lastly the whites. Butter a deep dish and put the jam, which should be pretty stiff, at the bottom. Fill up with the mixture. Bake about half an hour. Eat cold with sugar sifted over the top. Rice pudding, plain. 1 coffee cup rice, 2 quarts milk, 8 tablespoonsful sugar, 1 teaspoonful salt, butter the size of an egg, melted, nutmeg and cinnamon to taste. Wash and pick over the rice, and soak in 1 pint of the milk for 2 hours. Then add the rest of the milk, the sugar, salt, butter, and spice. Bake 2 hours and eat cold. Rice and tapioca pudding. 1/2 cup rice, 1/2 cup tapioca, 3/4 cup sugar, 3 pints milk, cinnamon to taste. Soak the tapioca in a cup of the milk for 3 hours. Wash the rice in several waters, and soak in another cup of milk as long as you do the tapioca. Sweeten the remaining quart of milk. Put all the ingredients together and bake 2 hours in a slow oven. Eat cold. Rice pudding with eggs. 1 quart milk, 4 eggs, 1/2 cup rice, 3/4 cup sugar, 1 tablespoonful butter, handful of raisins, seeded and cut in two. Soak the rice in a pint of milk an hour, then set the saucepan containing it where it will slowly heat to a boil. Boil 5 minutes, remove, and let it cool. Beat the yolks, add the sugar and butter, the rice and the milk in which it was cooked, with a pint of unboiled. the beaten whites, and finally the raisins. Grate nutmeg on top, and bake 3/4 of an hour or until the custard is well set and of a light brown. Eat cold. Rice flour pudding. 2 quarts of milk, 1/2 pound rice flour, 1 cup sugar, 6 eggs, 1 tablespoonful of butter, 1 small teaspoonful nutmeg, 2 teaspoonfuls vanilla or rose water, 1 lemon, juice of the whole and half the grated rind. Heat the milk to a boil, and stir in the rice flour wet to a smooth paste with a little cold milk. Boil until well thickened, stirring all the time. Take from the fire, and while still hot stir in the butter, the yolks, beaten light with the sugar, the lemon, nutmeg, and the whites of 3 eggs. Mix well, and bake in a buttered dish 3/4 of an hour. Just before you take it up, draw it to the mouth of the oven and cover with a meringue of the remaining whites, beaten stiff with 2 tablespoonfuls powdered sugar, and flavored with vanilla or rose water. Bake until the meringue begins to brown. Sift sugar on the top and eat cold. Batter pudding. 1 pint of milk, 4 eggs, whites and yolks beaten separately, 2 even cups of flour, 1 teaspoonful of salt, 1 pinch of soda. Bake in a buttered dish 3/4 of an hour. Serve in the pudding dish as soon as it is drawn from the oven, and eat with rich sauce. Or, you may boil it in a buttered mold or floured bag, flouring it very thickly. Boil 2 hours, taking care the boiling does not cease for a moment until the pudding is done. Batter pudding No. 2. 1 quart milk, 10 tablespoonfuls flour, 7 eggs, 1 teaspoonful salt, 1/2 teaspoonful soda dissolved in hot water, 1 teaspoonful cream tartar, sifted into the flour. Wet the flour gradually with the milk to a very smooth paste. Next add the beaten yolks, then the salt and soda, lastly the whites, whipped to a stiff froth. Bake in a buttered dish for an hour, and serve at once. Eat hot, with sauce. If you boil it, leave plenty of room to swell in the bag, and boil 2 hours. End of section 40. Section 41 of Common Sense in the Household. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne. Common Sense in the Household, a Manual of Practical Housewifery by Marion Harland. Puddings, Part 2. Cottage pudding. 1 cup of sugar, 1 tablespoonful of butter, 2 eggs, 1 cup sweet milk, 3 cups flour, or enough to make a tolerably stiff batter, 1/2 teaspoonful of soda, 1 teaspoonful cream of tartar, sifted with the flour, 1 teaspoonful salt. Rub the butter and sugar together. Beat in the yolks, then the milk and soda, the salt, and the beaten whites, alternately with the flour. Bake in a buttered mold. Turn out upon a dish, cut in slices, and eat with liquid sauce. This is a simple but very nice pudding. German puffs. 3 cups flour, 3 cups milk, 3 eggs, whites and yolks beaten separately and very light, 3 teaspoonfuls melted butter, 1 saltspoonful salt. Pour in 9 well-battered cups of same size as that used for measuring, and bake to a fine brown. Eat as soon as done, with sauce. Cup puddings. 4 eggs, the weight of the eggs in sugar and in flour, half their weight in butter, 2 tablespoonfuls milk, 1/4 teaspoonful soda dissolved in hot water. Rub the sugar and butter together. Beat the yolks light, and add then the milk and soda, lastly the flour and beaten whites alternately. Fill 6 small cups well buttered, and bake 20 minutes, or until a nice brown. Eat warm. Lemon pudding. 1 cup of sugar, 4 eggs, 2 tablespoonfuls cornstarch, 2 lemons, juice of both and rind of 1, 1 pint milk, 1 tablespoonful butter. Heat the milk to boiling, and stir in the cornstarch, wet with a few spoonfuls of cold water. Boil 5 minutes, stirring constantly. While hot, mix in the butter, and set it away to cool. Beat the yolks light, and add the sugar, mixing very thoroughly before putting in the lemon juice and grated rind. Beat this to a stiff cream, and add gradually to the cornstarch milk, when the latter is cold. Stir all smooth, Put in a buttered dish and bake. Eat cold. Lemon meringue pudding. Very nice. 1 quart milk, 2 cups breadcrumbs, 4 eggs, 1/2 cup butter, 1 cup white sugar, 1 large lemon, juice and half the rind, grated. Soak the bread in the milk, add the beaten yolks, with the butter and sugar rubbed to a cream, also the lemon. Bake in a buttered dish until firm and slightly brown. Draw to the door of the oven and cover with a meringue of the whites whipped to a froth with 3 tablespoonfuls of powdered sugar and a little lemon juice. Brown very slightly, sift powdered sugar over it, and eat cold. You may make an orange pudding in the same way. Cocoanut pudding. 1/2 pound grated cocoanut, 1/2 cup stale sponge cake, crumbled fine, 1 cup sugar, 1 large cup rich milk, cream if you can get it, 6 eggs, 2 tablespoonfuls vanilla or rose water. Cream the butter and sugar and add the beaten yolks. When these are well mixed, put in the cocoanut, stir well before adding the milk, cake crumbs, flavoring, and lastly the whites of 3 eggs. Whip the other whites stiff with 3 tablespoonfuls of powdered sugar. Flavor with vanilla, and just before taking the pudding from the oven, spread this meringue over the top and close the oven until the icing is slightly browned. Bake in all 3/4 of an hour. Orange marmalade pudding. 1 cup fine breadcrumbs, 1/2 cup sugar, 1 cup milk or cream, 4 eggs, 2 tablespoonfuls butter, 1 cup orange or other sweet marmalade. Rub the butter and sugar together, add the yolks well beaten, the milk, breadcrumbs, and the whites whipped to a froth. Put a layer of this in the bottom of a well-buttered mold, spread thickly with some pretty stiff marmalade, orange is nicest, then another layer of the mixture, and so on until the mold is full, having the custard mixture at top. Bake in a moderate oven about an hour. Turn out of the mold upon a dish and serve with sweetened cream or custard. Macaroni pudding. 1 cup macaroni broken into inch lengths, 1 quart milk, 4 eggs, 1/2 lemon, juice and grated peel, 2 tablespoonfuls butter, 3/4 cup sugar. Simmer the macaroni in half the milk until tender. While hot, stir in the butter, the yolks, well beaten up with the sugar, the lemon, and lastly the whipped whites. Bake in a buttered mold about half an hour until nicely browned. Vermicelli pudding. May be made according to the foregoing receipt. Neapolitan pudding. Very fine. 1 large cup fine breadcrumbs soaked in milk, 3/4 cup sugar, 1 lemon, juice and grated rind, 6 eggs, 1/2 pound stale sponge cake, 1/2 pound macaroons, almond, 1/2 cup jelly or jam, and 1 small tumbler of sherry wine, 1/2 cup milk poured upon the breadcrumbs, 1 tablespoonful melted butter. Rub the butter and sugar together. Put the beaten yolks in next, then the soaked breadcrumbs, the lemon juice, and rind, and beat to a smooth, light paste before adding the whites. Butter your mold very well, and put in the bottom a light layer of dry breadcrumbs. Upon this one of macaroons, laid evenly and closely together. Wet this with wine and cover with a layer of the mixture, then with slices of sponge cake, spread thickly with jelly or jam. Next macaroons, wet with wine, more custard, sponge cake, and jam, and so on until the mold is full, putting a layer of the mixture at the top. Cover closely and steam in the oven 3/4 of an hour, then remove the cover and brown the top. Turn out carefully into a dish, and pour over it a sauce made of currant jelly warmed, and beaten up with 2 tablespoonfuls melted butter and a glass of pale sherry. A plain round mold is best for the pudding, as much of its comeliness depends upon the manner in which the cake and macaroons are fitted in. It is a pretty and good pudding, and will well repay the trifling trouble and care required to manage it properly. It is also nice boiled in a buttered mold. Rhubarb pudding. Prepare the stalks as for pies. Cover the bottom of a buttered pudding dish with slices of bread and butter. Cover with the rhubarb cut into short pieces. Sprinkle abundantly with sugar, then put on another layer of bread and butter, and so on until your dish is full. Cover and steam, while baking, for half an hour. Remove the lid and bake 10 minutes or until browned. Eat with hot sauce. Gooseberry pudding. 1 pint ripe or nearly ripe gooseberries, 6 or 8 slices toasted stale bread, 1 cup milk, 1/2 cup sugar, 1 tablespoonful butter, melted. Stew the gooseberries 10 minutes, very slowly, not to break them. Cut your slices of bread to fit your pudding dish, and toast to a light brown on both sides. Cut off all the crust before toasting. Dip each slice while hot in milk and spread with the melted butter. Cover the bottom of the dish with them. Put next a layer of the gooseberries, sprinkled thickly with sugar, more toast, more berries, and so on until the dish is full. Cover closely and steam in a moderate oven 20 or 25 minutes. Turn out upon a hot dish and pour over it a good pudding sauce. This is considered a wholesome breakfast dish, and is certainly good. In this case omit the sauce, sift powdered sugar over the top, and eat with the same. Newark pudding. 1 cup fine breadcrumbs soaked in a pint of the milk. 1 quart of milk. 5 eggs. 2 tablespoonsful rice flour. 1/2 pound raisins, seeded, cut in two and dredged with flour. Vanilla or bitter almond extract. 2 tablespoonsful melted butter, and a 1/2 teaspoonful soda. Beat the yolks light, add the soaked breadcrumbs and milk, stir to a smooth batter, and put in the rice flour. Wet up first with cold milk. The reserved pint of milk, the seasoning, butter, the fruit, lastly the whites whipped stiff. Bake an hour in a buttered mold. Turn out and pour sauce over it, serving hard sauce also with it. Or, you may boil the mixture 2 hours in a floured cloth or buttered mold. Baked plum pudding. 1 1/4 pound of flour, 1 pound raisins, seeded, cut in two, and dredged with flour. 1/2 pound suet, freed from strings and powdered. 1 cup sugar. 2 ounces citron, shredded fine. 5 eggs, whites and yolks beaten separately. Nutmeg, cinnamon, and cloves, 1 teaspoonful each. Milk to make a thick batter of the flour. Begin with 2 cups and add more, if necessary. Beat the yolks and sugar together, add the suet and spice, then the flour, moistening the mixture gradually with milk until you can move the spoon in it. Dredge the fruit and put it in by degrees. Finally stir in the beaten whites. Beat all very hard and long before baking in a buttered mold. It will require at least an hour and a half in a moderate oven. Turn out and eat with rich sweet sauce. Bell's dumplings. 1 quart prepared flour. 2 1/2 tablespoonsful lard and butter mixed. 2 cups of milk, or enough to make a soft dough. Roll out 1/4 of an inch thick. Cut into oblong pieces, rounded at the corners. Put a great spoonful damson, cherry, or other tart preserve in the middle, and roll into a dumpling. Bake 3/4 of an hour. Brush over with beaten egg white while hot. Set back in the oven 3 minutes to glaze. Eat hot with brandy or wine sauce. Or, you may make a roll pudding out of it by rolling out the paste into an oblong sheet, spreading thickly with the preserves, folding it up as one would a traveling shawl to be put into a strap, pinching the ends together so that the juice may not escape, and boiling in a floured cloth fitted to the shape of the roly-poly. Boil an hour and a half. Boiled puddings. You can boil puddings in a bowl, a mold, or a cloth. The mold should have a closely fitted top, and be buttered well, top and all, before the batter or dough is put in. These molds are usually made with hasps or other fastening. In lack of this, you had better tie down the cover securely. I once boiled a pudding in a tin pail, the top of which I made more secure by fitting it over a cloth floured on the inside, lest the pudding should stick. The experiment succeeded admirably, and I commend the suggestion to those who find, after the pudding is mixed, that their mold leaks, or the bowl that did duty as a substitute has been broken, and nothing said to the mistress about it. If you use a bowl, butter it, and tie a floured cloth tightly over the top. If a cloth, have it clean and sweet, and flour bountifully on the inside. In all, leave room for batter, bread, rice, and cracker puddings to swell. Tie the string very tightly about the mouth of the bag, which must be made with felled seams at sides and bottom, the better to exclude the water. The water must be boiling when the pudding goes in, and not stop boiling for 1 instant until it's done. If it is in a bag, this must be turned several times under water to prevent sticking or scorching to the sides of the pot. The bag must also be entirely covered, while the water should not quite reach the top of a mold. If you use a basin, dip the cloth in boiling water before dredging with flour on the inside. When the time is up, take mold, basin, or cloth from the boiling pot, and plunge instantly into cold water, then turn out without the loss of a second. This will prevent sticking, and leave a clearer impression of the mold upon the contents. Boiled puddings should be served as soon as they are done, as they soon become heavy. Many of the baked puddings I have described are quite as good boiled. As a safe rule, double the time of baking if you boil. Berry pudding. 1 pint of milk, 2 eggs, 1 saltspoonful salt, 1/4 teaspoonful soda dissolved in hot water, 1/2 teaspoonful cream tartar, sifted through a cup of flour and added to enough flour to make a thick batter. 1 pint blackberries, raspberries, currants, or huckleberries, well dredged with flour, stirred in at the last. Huckleberry pudding. 1 pint milk, 2 eggs, 1 quart flour, or enough for thick batter, 1 gill baker's yeast, 1 saltspoonful salt, 1 teaspoonful soda dissolved in boiling water, nearly a quart of berries, well dredged with flour. Make a batter of eggs, milk, flour, yeast, salt, and soda, and set it to rise in a warm place for about 4 hours. When you are ready to boil it, stir in the dredged fruit quickly and lightly. Boil in a buttered mold or floured cloth for 2 hours. This will be found lighter and more wholesome than boiled pastry. Eat hot with sweet sauce. Fruit valise pudding. 1 quart flour, 1 tablespoonful lard, and same of butter, 1 teaspoonful soda dissolved in hot water, 2 teaspoonful cream tartar sifted through the flour, 1 saltspoonful salt, 2 cups milk or enough to make the flour into soft dough, 1 quart berries, chopped apples, sliced peaches, or other fruit. Jam, preserves, canned fruit, or marmalade may be substituted for the berries. Roll out the crust less than ½ inch thick, indeed a quarter of an inch will do, into an oblong sheet. Cover thickly with the fruit and sprinkle with sugar. Begin at one end and roll it up closely, the fruit inside. In putting this in, leave a narrow margin at the other end of the roll, which should be folded down closely like the flap of a pocketbook. Pinch the ends of the folded roll together to prevent the escape of the fruit, and baste up in a bag the same size and shape as the valise. Flour the bag well before putting in the pudding, having previously dipped it, the cloth, into hot water, and wring it out. Boil an hour and a half. Serve hot with sauce and cut crosswise in slices ½ an inch thick. Boiled apple dumplings. No. 1. Make a paste according to the above receipt, cut in squares, and put in the center of each an apple pared and cored. Bring the corners together, enclose each dumpling in a small square cloth, tied up bagwise, leaving room to swell. Each cloth should be dipped in hot water, wrung out, and floured on the inside before the apple is put in. Boil 1 hour. Apple dumplings. No. 2. 1 quart flour, 1/4 pound suet, 1 teaspoonful salt, 1/2 teaspoonful soda dissolved in hot water, 1 teaspoonful cream tartar sifted in the flour, cold water enough to make into a tolerably stiff paste. Roll out, cut into squares, put in the middle of each a fine juicy apple pared and cored. Fill the hole left by the core with marmalade or with sugar wet with lemon juice. Stick a clove in the sugar. Close the paste, tie up in the claws, when you have wet them with hot water and floured them, and boil 1 hour. A pleasing idea for dumpling claws is to crochet them in a close stitch with stout tidy cotton. They are easily done, wash and wear well, and leave a very pretty pattern upon the paste when they are opened. Crochet them round, with a cord for drawing run into the outer edge. Boiled fruit pudding. Prepare a paste in accordance with either of the foregoing receipts, but roll into one sheet. Lay apples, peaches, or berries in the center, paring and slicing the fruit. Sprinkle with sugar, and close the paste over them as you would a dumpling. Dip a stout cloth in hot water, flour the inside, put in the pudding, tie tightly, and boil 2 hours and a half. Eat with hot sauce. Rice dumplings. 1 pound rice boiled without stirring until soft and the top dry. 12 pippins, pared and cored. Strawberry marmalade or crabapple jelly. Let the rice cool upon a sieve or coarse cloth that it may dry at the same time. Dip your dumpling cloths in hot water, wring them out and flour well inside. Put a handful of the cold rice upon each, spreading it out into a smooth sheet. Lay in the center an apple, fill the hole left by the core with marmalade or jelly, draw up the cloth carefully to enclose the apple with a coating of rice, tie and boil 1 hour. Turn over with care, pour sweet sauce or rich sweetened cream over them, and send around more in a boat with them. Suet dumplings, plain. 2 cups fine breadcrumbs soaked in a very little milk. 1 cup beef suet, freed from strings and powdered. 4 eggs, whites and yolks separated and beaten very light. 1 tablespoonful sugar. 1 teaspoonful cream tartar, sifted into the flour. 1/2 teaspoonful soda dissolved in boiling water. 1 teaspoonful salt. Enough milk to mix into a stiff paste. Make into large balls with floured hands. Put into dumpling cloths dipped into hot water and floured inside. Leave room to swell, and tie the strings very tightly. Boil 3/4 of an hour. Serve hot with wine sauce. Fruit suet dumplings are made as above, with the addition of 1/2 pound raisins, seeded, chopped, and dredged with flour, and 1/4 pound currants, washed, dried, and dredged. Boil 1 hour and a quarter. Boiled Indian meal pudding. 1 quart milk, 1 quart Indian meal, 3 eggs, 3 heaping tablespoonsful sugar, and 1 teaspoonful salt, 1/2 pound beef suet, chopped into powder. Scald the milk, and while boiling hot stir in the meal and suet with the salt. When cold add the yolks, beaten light with the sugar, then the whites. Dip your bag in hot water, flour it and fill half full with the mixture, as it will swell very much. Boil 5 hours. Eat very hot with butter and sugar. Cabinet pudding. 1/2 pound flour, 1/4 pound butter, 5 eggs, 1 1/2 pound sugar, 1/2 pound raisins, seeded and cut into 3 pieces each, 1/2 pound currants, washed and dried, 1/2 cup cream or milk, 1/2 lemon, juice and rind grated. Cream the butter and sugar, add the beaten yolks, then the milk and flour, alternately with the whites. Lastly, stir in the fruit, well dredged with flour, turn into a buttered mold, and boil 2 hours and a half at least. Serve hot, with cabinet pudding sauce over it. See sweet sauces. Eve's pudding. 1 heaping cup of fine dry breadcrumbs, 1/2 pound pared and chopped apples, 1/2 pound raisins, seeded and chopped, 6 ounces of currants, washed and dried, 6 eggs, 1 teaspoonful nutmeg, and same of allspice, 1 glass brandy, 1 cup sugar, and 1 teaspoonful salt, 1/2 pound suet, chopped to powder. Work the sugar into the beaten yolks, then the suet and crumbs, with the chopped apples, next the brandy and spice, then the whipped whites, lastly the fruit, well dredged with flour. Boil in a buttered bowl or mold 3 hours. Eat hot with sauce. The Queen of Plum Puddings. 1 pound butter, 1 pound of suet, freed from strings and chopped fine, 1 pound of sugar, 1 1/2 pounds of flour, 2 pounds of raisins, seeded, chopped, and dredged with flour, 2 pounds of currants, picked over carefully after they are washed, 1/4 pound of citron, shred fine, 12 eggs, whites and yolks beaten separately, 1 pint of milk, 1 cup of brandy, 1/2 ounce of cloves, 1/2 ounce of mace, 2 grated nutmegs. Cream the butter and sugar. Beat in the yolks when you have whipped them smooth and light. Next put in the milk, then the flour, alternately with the beaten whites. Then the brandy and spice. Lastly the fruit, well dredged with flour. Mix all thoroughly. Wring out your pudding cloth in hot water. Flour well inside. Pour in the mixture and boil 5 hours. I can confidently recommend this as the best plum pudding I have ever tasted, even when the friend at whose table I had first the pleasure of eating it imitated the example of good King Arthur's economical spouse, and what we couldn't eat that night, next day fried, by heating a little butter in a frying pan and laying in slices of her pudding, warmed them to almost their original excellence. It will keep a long time in locked closet or safe. Orange roly-poly. Make a light paste as for apple dumplings or valise pudding. Roll in an oblong sheet and lay oranges, sweet ones, peeled, sliced, and seeded, thickly all over it. Sprinkle with white sugar. Scatter a teaspoonful or two of the grated yellow peel over all, and roll up closely, folding down the end to secure the syrup. Boil in a pudding cloth 1 hour and a half. Eat with lemon sauce. Cherry or currant pyramid. Wash and stone the cherries, or pick the currants from their stems. Make some good light crust, roll it out 1/4 inch thick, and cut for the bottom a round piece about the size of a tea plate. You can use the top of a tin pail for a cutter. Spread your fruit upon this, and sprinkle with sugar, leaving a 1/2 inch margin all around. Roll out a second sheet, an inch less in diameter than the first, lay it carefully upon the fruit, and turn up the margin of the lower piece over the edge of this. Spread this in turn with fruit and sugar, and cover with a third and lessening round, proceeding in this order until the 6th and topmost cover is not more than 3 inches across. Have ready a conical cap of stout muslin, adapted to the proportions and dimensions of your pile. Dip it in boiling water, flour inside, and draw gently over all. It should be large enough to meet and tie under the base without cramping the pyramid. Boil 2 hours and eat with sweet sauce. End of section 41.
Section 42 of Common Sense in the Household. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betty B. Common Sense in the Household, a Manual of Practical Housewifery by Marion Harland. Fritters, pancakes, etc. Have plenty of nice sweet lard in which to fry fritters, and test the heat by dropping in a teaspoonful before you risk more. If right, the batter will rise quickly to the surface in a puffball, spluttering and dancing, and will speedily assume a rich golden brown. Take up, as soon as done, with a skimmer, shaking it to dislodge any drops of lard that may adhere. Pile in a hot dish, sift sugar over them, and send instantly to the table. Fry as many at a time as the kettle will hold, and send in hot fresh ones while the batter lasts. A round bottom saucepan or kettle, rather wide at top, is best for frying them. Use a frying pan for pancakes. Heat it, put in a teaspoonful or two of lard and run it quickly over the bottom. Then pour in a large ladleful of batter, enough to cover the bottom of the pan with a thin sheet. Turn with a tin spatula very carefully to avoid tearing it. The frying pan should be a small one. Have ready a hot dish, turn out the pancake upon it, cover with powdered sugar, and roll up dexterously like a sheet of paper. Send half a dozen to table at once, keeping them hot by setting the dish in the oven until enough are baked. I am thus explicit in these general instructions to save myself the trouble, and the reader the tedium, of a repetition under each receipt. In olden times it was a boast of notable cooks that they could toss a pancake from the pan out of the top of the chimney with such accuracy of calculation that it would turn itself on the way back and settle in its place, ready, like St. Lawrence, to have the other side fried. I never saw a pancake tossed, although in my childish days I saw hundreds fried by the honorable tribe, now so fast passing away, of old Virginia cooks. I do not advise this acrobatic system of culinary exploit, especially for beginners. Indeed, I doubt if the pancakes would be found equal to the journey in these days of tight chimney throats and cooking stoves. They must be out of practice as well as their manufacturers. Be careful not to have too much grease in the pan. Fritters. No. 1. 1 pint flour, 4 eggs, 1 teaspoonful salt, 1 pint boiling water. Stir the flour into the water by degrees, and stir until it has boiled 3 minutes. Let it get almost cold, when beat in the yolks, then the whites of the eggs, which must be previously whipped stiff. Fritters. No. 2. 6 eggs, 1 quart milk, 3 cups flour, 1/2 teaspoonful soda dissolved in hot water, 1 teaspoonful cream tartar sifted into the flour, a little salt. Beat the yolks and whites separately, of course. Stir the milk in with the former, then the soda, the flour, and salt, finally the whites. Beat very hard and fry at once in great ladlefuls. Apple fritters. A batter according to the preceding receipt. 3 large juicy apples, pared and quartered. 1 glass brandy. 1 tablespoonful white sugar. 1 teaspoonful cinnamon. Put the brandy, a very little water, the sugar, and the spice into a covered saucepan with the apples. Stir gently until half done. Drain off the liquor, every drop. Mince the apple when cold and stir into the batter. Or, you may parboil the apples in clear water with a very little sugar and proceed as just directed. Jelly fritters. 1 scant cup sponge cake crumbs, very fine and dry. 1 cup boiling milk. 4 eggs. 2 tablespoonfuls powdered sugar. 1 teaspoonful cornstarch, wet in a little cold milk. 2 tablespoonfuls currant or cranberry jelly. Soak the cake crumbs in the boiling milk and stir in the cornstarch. Heat all together to a boil, stirring all the time. Beat the yolks light and add to this as it cools with the sugar. Whip in the jelly a little at a time and put in the whites, beaten to a stiff froth, at the last. Fry immediately. Bread fritters. 1 quart milk, boiling hot. 2 cups fine bread crumbs. Aerated bread is best. 3 eggs. 1 teaspoonful nutmeg. 1 tablespoonful butter, melted. 1 saltspoonful salt, and the same of soda, dissolved in hot water. Soak the bread in the boiling milk 10 minutes in a covered bowl. Beat to a smooth paste, add the whipped yolks, the butter, salt, soda, and finally the whites, whipped stiff. Queen's toast. Fry slices of stale baker's bread, aerated if you can get it, in boiling lard to a fine brown. Dip each slice quickly in boiling water to remove the grease. Sprinkle with powdered sugar and pile upon a hot plate. Before toasting, cut the slices with a round cake cutter, taking off all the crust. They look better when piled up. Pour sweet wine sauce over them when hot, and serve at once. Jelly cake fritters. Very nice. Some stale sponge or plain cupcake, cut into rounds with a cake cutter. Hot lard, strawberry or other jam or jelly, a little boiling milk. Cut the cake carefully and fry a nice brown. Dip each slice for a second in a bowl of boiling milk, draining this off on the side of the vessel. Lay on a hot dish and spread thickly with strawberry jam, peach jelly, or other delicate conserve. Pile them neatly and send around hot with cream to pour over them. This is a nice way of using up stale cake, and if rightly prepared, the dessert is almost equal to Neapolitan pudding. Pancakes. 1 pint of flour, 6 eggs, 1 saltspoonful salt, and same of soda dissolved in vinegar. Milk to make a thin batter. Begin with 2 cups and add until the batter is of the right consistency. Beat the yolks light, add the salt, soda, and 2 cups of milk, then the flour and beaten whites alternately, and thin with more milk. Jelly or jam pancakes. A batter as above. When the pancakes are fried, lay upon a hot plate, spread quickly with nice jam or jelly, and roll up neatly upon the preserves. Sprinkle lightly with powdered sugar, and send around with wine sauce or sweetened cream. End of section 42. Section 43 of Common Sense in the Household. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betty B. Common Sense in the Household, a Manual of Practical Housewifery by Marion Harland. Sweet or pudding sauces. Hard sauce. Stir to a cream 1 cup of butter, 3 cups of powdered sugar. When light, beat in 3/4 teacup wine, juice of a lemon, 2 teaspoonfuls nutmeg. Beat long and hard until several shades lighter in color than at first, and creamy in consistency. Smooth into shape with the broad knife dipped in cold water, and stamp with a wooden mould, first scalded and then dipped in cold water. Set upon the ice until the pudding is served. Beehive sauce. Mix a hard sauce according to the previous receipt, and when light, set aside 3 or 4 tablespoonfuls in a plate. To the larger quantity left add gradually cherry, currant, or cranberry juice enough to color it a good pink. Red jelly will do if berries are out of season. Beat the coloring matter in thoroughly and shape into a conical mound. Roll half a sheet of note paper into a long, narrow funnel. Tie a string about it to keep it in shape, and fill with the uncolored sauce. Squeeze it out gently through the small end in a ridge, beginning at the base of the cone and winding about it to the top, filling your funnel as it is emptied, and guiding it carefully. The effect of the alternate white and pink lines is very pretty. If the pudding is one to which chocolate would be a pleasant addition, color with grated chocolate. Rub smooth in a little of the wine and ridge with white. Set upon the ice or upon the cellar floor until firm. Stick a colored almond or other ornamental candy upon the top. This beehive is easily made, and will set off even a plain pudding handsomely. Brandy sauce. Hard. 1/2 cup butter, 2 cups powdered sugar, 1 wineglass brandy, 1 teaspoonful mixed cinnamon and mace. Warm the butter very slightly, work in the sugar, and, when this is light, the brandy and spice. Beat hard, shape into a mould, and set in a cold place until wanted. White wine sauce. Liquid. 1/2 cup butter, 2 1/2 cups powdered sugar, 2 wineglasses pale sherry or white wine, 1/2 cup boiling water, 1 teaspoonful nutmeg. Work the butter into the sugar, moistening, as you go on, with boiling water. Beat long and hard until your bowl is nearly full of a creamy mixture. Then add gradually the wine and nutmeg, still beating hard. Turn into a tin pail, set within a saucepan of boiling water, and stir frequently until the sauce is hot, but not until it boils. Take the saucepan from the fire and leave the pail standing in the water, stirring the contents now and then until you are ready to serve the pudding. If rightly made, this sauce will be nearly as white as milk. Lemon sauce. 1 large cup of sugar, nearly half a cup of butter, 1 egg, 1 lemon, all the juice and half the grated peel, 1 teaspoonful nutmeg, 3 tablespoonfuls boiling water. Cream the butter and sugar and beat in the egg whipped light, the lemon and nutmeg. Beat hard 10 minutes and add, a spoonful at a time, the boiling water. Put in a tin pail and set within the uncovered top of the tea kettle, which you must keep boiling until the steam heats the sauce very hot, but not to boiling. Stir constantly. Milk pudding sauce. 2 eggs beaten stiff, 1 large cup of sugar, 5 tablespoonfuls boiling milk, 1/2 teaspoonful arrowroot or cornstarch, wet with cold milk, 1 teaspoonful nutmeg or mace, 1 tablespoonful butter. Rub the butter into the sugar, add the beaten eggs, and work all to a creamy froth. Wet the cornstarch and put in next with the spice. Finally, pour in by the spoonful the boiling milk, beating well all the time. Set within a saucepan of boiling water 5 minutes, stirring all the while, but do not let the sauce boil. This is a good sauce for bread and other simple puddings. Cabinet pudding sauce. Yolks of 4 eggs whipped very light, 1 lemon, juice and half the grated peel, 1 good glass of wine, 1 teaspoonful of cinnamon, 1 cup of sugar, 1 tablespoonful of butter. Rub the butter into the sugar, add the yolks, lemon, and spice. Beat 10 minutes and put in the wine, still stirring hard. Set within a saucepan of boiling water and beat while it heats, but do not let it boil. Pour over the pudding. Fruit pudding sauce. 1/2 cup butter, 2 1/2 cups sugar, 1 dessertspoonful cornstarch wet in a little cold milk, 1 lemon, juice and half the grated peel, 1 glass of wine, 1 cup boiling water. Cream the butter and sugar well. Pour the cornstarch into the boiling water and stir over a clear fire until it is well thickened. Put all together in a bowl and beat 5 minutes before returning to the saucepan. Heat once, almost to the boiling point, add the wine, and serve. Custard sauce. 1 pint of milk, 2 eggs beaten very light, 1/2 wineglass of brandy, 1 cup powdered sugar stirred into the eggs, nutmeg to taste, 1 teaspoonful vanilla. Heat the milk to boiling, and add by degrees to the beaten eggs and sugar. Put in the nutmeg, and set within a saucepan of boiling water. Stir until it begins to thicken. Take it off and add the brandy gradually. Set until it is wanted within a pan of boiling water. Pour over the pudding when it comes from the mould. Jelly sauce. 1/2 cup currant jelly, 1 tablespoon butter melted, 1/2 dessertspoonful arrowroot or cornstarch, wet with cold water, 1 glass pale sherry, 3 tablespoonfuls boiling water. Stir the arrowroot into the boiling water and heat, stirring all the time until it thickens. Add the butter and set aside until almost cool, when beat in, spoonful by spoonful, the jelly to a smooth pink paste. Pour in the wine, stir hard, and heat in a tin vessel, set within another of boiling water until very hot. Pour over and around Neapolitan, bread and marmalade puddings, cake fritters, and Queen's toast. Sweetened cream. Cold. 1 pint of cream, 4 tablespoonfuls powdered sugar, 1 teaspoonful of nutmeg, 1 teaspoonful vanilla. Mix all well together, stirring until the sugar is dissolved. Eat with jam puddings, Queen of all puddings, Alice's pudding, and peach roly-poly. Cream sauce hot. 1 pint cream, 4 tablespoonfuls powdered sugar, whites of 2 eggs beaten stiff, extract of vanilla or bitter almonds, 1 teaspoonful, 1 teaspoonful nutmeg. Heat the cream slowly in a vessel set in a saucepan of boiling water, stirring often. When scalding, but not boiling hot, remove it from the fire, put in the sugar and nutmeg, stir 3 or 4 minutes, and add the whites. Mix thoroughly and flavor, setting the bowl containing it in a pan of hot water until the pudding is served, stirring now and then. Jelly sauce, No. 2. 1/2 cup currant jelly, 2 tablespoonfuls melted butter, 1 lemon, juice and half the grated peel, 1/2 teaspoonful nutmeg, 2 glasses wine, and a tablespoonful powdered sugar. Heat the butter a little more than blood warm. Beat the jelly to a smooth batter, and add gradually the butter, the lemon, and nutmeg. Warm almost to a boil, stirring all the while. Beat hard, put in the sugar, lastly the wine. Set in a vessel of hot water, stirring now and then until it is wanted. Keep it covered to hinder the escape of the wine flavor. Stir well before pouring out. This is a very fine sauce, particularly for cabinet and Neapolitan puddings. End of section 43. Section 44 of Common Sense in the Household. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betty B. Common Sense in the Household, a Manual of Practical Housewifery by Marion Harland. Custards, blancmange, jellies, and creams. A good rule for custard is 5 eggs to a quart of milk, and a tablespoonful of sugar to each egg, although a good plain custard can be made with an egg for each cup of milk and 4 tablespoonfuls of sugar to the quart. Creams and custards that are to be frozen must have at least 1/3 more sugar than those which are not to undergo this process. In heating the milk for custard, do not let it quite boil before adding the yolks. My plan, which has proved a safe one thus far, is to take the scalding milk from the fire, and instead of pouring the beaten eggs into it, to put a spoonful or 2 of the milk to them, beating well all the while, adding more and more milk as I mix, until there is no longer danger of sudden curdling. Then return all to the fire, and boil gently until the mixture is of the right consistency. From 10 to 15 minutes should thicken a quart. Stir constantly. A pinch of soda added in hot weather will prevent the milk from curdling. Always boil milk and custard in a vessel set within another of boiling water. If you have not a custard or farina kettle, improvise one by setting a tin pail inside of a pot of hot water, taking care it does not float, also that the water is not so deep as to bubble over the top. Custards are better and lighter if the yolks and whites are beaten separately, the latter stirred in at the last. Boiled custard. 1 quart of milk, yolks of 5 eggs and the whites of 7, 2 for the meringue, 6 tablespoonfuls sugar, vanilla flavoring 1 teaspoonful to the pint. Heat the milk almost to boiling. Beat the yolks light and stir in the sugar. Add the milk in the manner described in "General Directions" at head of this section. Stir in 5 whites whipped stiff. Return to the fire and stir until thick, but not until it breaks. Season it with vanilla, pour into glass cups, whip the whites of 2 eggs to a meringue with a heaping tablespoonful of powdered sugar, and when the custard is cold, pile a little of this upon the top of each cup. You may lay a preserved strawberry or cherry, or a bit of melon sweetmeat, or a little bright jelly upon each. Almond custards. 1 pint milk, half cream. 1/4 pound almonds, blanched and pounded to a paste, a few at a time in a Wedgewood mortar, adding gradually 2 tablespoonfuls of rose water, yolks of 3 eggs and whites of 4, 2 for meringue, 4 tablespoonfuls sugar, 1 teaspoonful extract bitter almond in meringue. Scald the milk, add the beaten yolks, the sugar, the almond paste, and the whites of 2 eggs. Boil, stirring constantly until it thickens. Stir up well when almost cold, and pour into cups. Make a meringue of the whites of 2 eggs and 2 tablespoonfuls powdered sugar, flavored with bitter almond, and heap upon each cup. Quaking custard. 3 cups milk, yolks of 4 eggs, reserving the whites for meringue. 1/2 package Cooper's or Cox's gelatine, 6 tablespoonfuls sugar, vanilla or lemon flavoring, juice of a lemon in meringue. Soak the gelatine in a cup of the cold milk 2 hours. Then heat the rest of the milk to boiling, add that in which the gelatine is, and stir over the fire until the latter is quite dissolved. Take from the fire and let it stand 5 minutes before putting in the beaten yolks and sugar. Heat slowly until it begins to thicken perceptibly, not boil, say 7 or 8 minutes, stirring constantly. When nearly cold, having stirred it every few minutes during the time, flavor it, wash out your mould in cold water, and without wiping it, pour in the custard and set on the ice or in a cold place to harden. When quite firm, turn into a cold dish, loosening it by wrapping about the mould a cloth wrung out in hot water, or dipping the mould for an instant in warm, not boiling water. Have ready the whites whipped to a froth with 3 tablespoonfuls powdered sugar and juice of a lemon. Heap neatly about the base of the moulded custard, like snowdrifts. If you like, you may dot this with minute bits of currant jelly. This is a pleasing dish to the eye and taste. Floating island. 1 quart of milk, 5 eggs, whites and yolks beaten separately, 4 tablespoonfuls heaping white sugar, 2 teaspoonfuls extract bitter almond or vanilla, 1/2 cup currant jelly. Beat the yolks well, stir in the sugar, and add the hot, not boiling milk, a little at a time. Boil until it begins to thicken. When cool, flavor and pour into a glass dish, first stirring it up well. Heap upon it a meringue of the whites into which you have beaten gradually 1/2 cup of currant, cranberry, or other bright tart jelly. Dot with bits of jelly cut into rings or stars, or straight slips laid on in a pattern. Spanish cream. 1/2 box of gelatine, 1 quart of milk, yolks of 3 eggs, 1 small cup of sugar. Soak the gelatine an hour in the milk, put on the fire and stir well as it warms. Beat the yolks very light with the sugar, add to the scalding milk, and heat to boiling point, stirring all the while. Strain through thin muslin or tarlatan, and when almost cold, put into a mould wet with cold water, flavor with vanilla or lemon. Bavarian cream, very fine. 1 quart sweet cream, yolks only of 4 eggs, 1/2 ounce of gelatine or isinglass, 1 cup (small) of sugar, 2 teaspoonfuls vanilla or bitter almond extract. Soak the gelatine in just enough cold water to cover it for an hour. Drain and stir into a pint of the cream made boiling hot. Beat the yolks smooth with the sugar and add the boiling mixture, beaten in a little at a time. Heat until it begins to thicken, but do not actually boil. Remove it from the fire, flavor, and while it is still hot, stir in the other pint of cream, whipped or churned in a syllabub churn to a stiff froth. Beat in this whip, a spoonful at a time, into the custard, until it is the consistency of sponge cake batter. Dip a mould in cold water, pour in the mixture, and set on the ice to form. Snow custard. 1/2 package Cox's gelatine, 3 eggs, 1 pint milk, 2 cups of sugar, juice of 1 lemon. Soak the gelatine 1 hour in a teacupful of cold water. To this, at the end of this time, add 1 pint boiling water. Stir until the gelatine is thoroughly dissolved. Add 2/3 of the sugar and the lemon juice. Beat the whites of the eggs to a stiff froth, and when the gelatine is quite cold, whip it into the whites, a spoonful at a time, for an hour. Whip steadily and evenly, and when all is stiff, pour into a mould, previously wet with cold water, and set in a cold place. In 4 or 5 hours, turn into a glass dish. Make a custard of the milk, eggs, and remainder of the sugar, flavor with vanilla or bitter almond, and when the meringue is turned out of the mould, pour this around the base. Baked custard. 1 quart of milk, 5 eggs beaten light, whites and yolks separately, 5 tablespoonfuls sugar mixed with the yolks, nutmeg and vanilla. Scald but not boil the milk. Add by degrees to the beaten yolks, and when well mixed, stir in the whites. Flavor and pour into a deep dish or custard cups of white stone china. Set these in a pan of hot water, grate nutmeg upon each, and bake until firm. Eat cold from the cups. French tapioca custard. 5 dessertspoonfuls tapioca, 1 quart of milk, 1 pint of cold water, 3 eggs, 1 teaspoonful vanilla or other essence, 1 heaping cup of sugar, a pinch of salt. Soak the tapioca in the water 5 hours. Let the milk come to a boil, add the tapioca, the water in which it was boiled, and a good pinch of salt. Stir until boiling hot, and add gradually to the beaten yolks and sugar. Boil again, always in a vessel set within another of hot water, stirring constantly. Let it cook until thick, but not too long, as the custard will break. 5 minutes after it reaches the boil will suffice. Pour into a bowl, and stir gently into the mixture the whites of the eggs, beaten to a stiff froth. Flavor and set aside in a glass dish until very cold. Eat with an accompaniment of light cake and brandied or canned peaches or pears. This will be found a very delightful dessert. Tapioca blancmange. 1/2 pound tapioca soaked in a cup of cold water 4 hours. 1 pint rich new milk. 3/4 cup of sugar. 2 teaspoonfuls bitter almond or vanilla essence. A little salt. Heat the milk and stir in the soaked tapioca. When it has dissolved, add the sugar. Boil slowly 15 minutes, stirring all the time. Take from the fire and beat until nearly cold. Flavor and pour into a mould dipped in cold water. Turn out and pour cold sweetened cream around it. Sago blancmange may be made in the same way as tapioca. Cornstarch blancmange. 1 quart of milk, 4 tablespoonfuls cornstarch, wet in a little cold water. 3 eggs well beaten, whites and yolks separately. 1 cup of sugar, vanilla, lemon, or other essence. 1 saltspoonful salt. Heat the milk to boiling. Stir in the cornstarch and salt, and boil together 5 minutes in a farina kettle. Then add the yolks, beaten light with the sugar. Boil 2 minutes longer, stirring all the while. Remove the mixture from the fire and beat in the whipped whites while it is boiling hot. Pour into a mould wet with cold water and set in a cold place. Eat with sugar and cream. Farina blancmange is made according to the above receipt, but boiled 15 minutes before the eggs are added. You may omit the eggs if you like, and only want a plain dessert. Arrowroot blancmange. 3 cups of new milk, 2½ tablespoonfuls of arrowroot wet up with cold milk, 3/4 cup of sugar, vanilla, lemon, or bitter almond flavoring, with a little white wine. Mix the arrowroot to a smooth batter with 1 cup of the milk. Heat the remainder to boiling, add the arrowroot, stirring constantly. When it begins to thicken, put in the sugar and cook 10 minutes longer, still stirring it well from the sides and bottom. Take it off, beat well 5 minutes, flavor with the essence and a small wineglass of white wine. Give a hard final stir before putting it into a mould wet with cold water. This is very nourishing for invalids and young children. For the latter you may omit the wine. Almond blancmange. 1 quart of milk, 1 ounce Cooper's gelatine, 3 ounces of almonds, blanched and pounded in a mortar, with 1 tablespoonful of rose water, added to prevent oiling, 3/4 cup sugar. Heat the milk to boiling, having previously soaked the gelatine in a cup of it for an hour. Turn in this when the milk is scalding hot, add the pounded almond paste, and stir all together 10 minutes before putting in the sugar. When the gelatine has dissolved, remove the blancmange from the vessel of boiling water in which you have cooked it, and strain through a thin muslin bag, pressing it well to get out the flavor of the almonds. There should be 3 or 4 bitter ones among them. Wet a mould with cold water, put in the blancmange, and set in a cold place until firm. You may make blancmange without the almonds, although it will not be so nice, and substitute vanilla for the rose water. Neapolitan blancmange. Make according to the foregoing receipt, and, after straining, separate into 4 different portions, allowing about a cupful of the mixture for each. Have ready 1 great tablespoonful chocolate, wet with a very little boiling water, and rubbed to a smooth paste for the brown coloring. Yolk of an egg beaten light for the yellow. 1 great tablespoonful of currant jelly for the pink. Beat the chocolate into 1 portion, mixing it well, the jelly into another, the egg into a third, returning this and that flavored with chocolate to the fire, and stirring until very hot, but not boiling. Leave the fourth uncolored. When quite cold and a little stiff, pour carefully into a wet mould, the white first, then the pink, next the yellow, and the chocolate last. Of course, when the blancmange is turned out, this order of colors will be reversed. Set in a cold place. Loosen, when firm, by dipping the mould for a moment in warm water, and working the top free from the edge with a few light touches of your fingers. This is a handsome dish and easily managed. Currant juice or cranberry color a finer pink than jelly, but are apt to thin the blancmange unless used cautiously. A little vanilla improves the chocolate. Jaune mange. 1 ounce Cox's gelatine soaked in half a cup cold water 1 hour. 1 cup of boiling water. Yolks of 4 eggs beaten very light. 1 orange, juice and half the grated peel. 1 lemon, juice and 1/3 the grated peel. 1 cup white wine or clear pale sherry. 1 cup powdered sugar, and a good pinch cinnamon. Stir the soaked gelatine in the boiling water until dissolved. Take from the fire and beat, a little at a time, into the yolks. Return to the inner saucepan with the sugar, orange, lemon, and cinnamon. Stir over a clear fire until it is boiling hot. Put in the wine and strain through a hair sieve or a piece of tarlatan. Set away in a mould wet with cold water. The success of this dish depends upon the stirring and the watchfulness of the cook. The mixture should not be allowed to boil at any moment. Velvet blancmange. 2 cups of sweet cream, 1/2 ounce Cooper's gelatine, soaked in a very little cold water 1 hour. 1/2 cup white sugar, powdered. 1 teaspoonful extract of bitter almonds. 1 glass white wine. Heat the cream to boiling. Stir in the gelatine and sugar, and, so soon as they are dissolved, take from the fire. Beat 10 minutes, or, what is better, churn in a syllabub churn until very light. Flavor and add by degrees the wine, mixing it in well. Put into moulds wet with cold water. Chocolate blancmange. 1 quart of milk, 1 ounce Cooper's gelatin, soaked in a cup of the milk 1 hour, 4 heaping tablespoonfuls of grated chocolate, rubbed up with a little milk, 3 eggs, whites and yolks beaten separately, 3/4 cup sugar, and 2 teaspoonfuls of vanilla. Heat the milk to boiling, pour in the gelatin and milk, and stir until it is dissolved. Add the sugar to the beaten yolks and stir until smooth. Beat the chocolate into this and pour in, spoonful by spoonful, the scalding milk upon the mixture, stirring all the while until all is in. Return to the inner saucepan and heat gently, stirring faithfully until it almost boils. Remove from fire, turn into a bowl, and whip in lightly and briskly the beaten whites with the vanilla. Set to form in moulds wet with cold water. Charlotte Russe. 1 pound of lady's fingers, 1 quart of rich sweet cream, 3/4 cup powdered sugar, 2 teaspoonfuls vanilla or other extract. Split and trim the cakes, and fit neatly in the bottom and sides of 2-quart moulds. Whip the cream to a stiff froth in a syllabub churn when you have sweetened and flavored it. Fill the moulds, lay cakes closely together on the top, and set upon the ice until needed. Or, you may use for this purpose a loaf of sponge cake, cutting strips from it for the sides and leaving the crust for the bottom and top, each in one piece. A tipsy charlotte. 1 large stale sponge cake, 1 pint rich sweet cream, 1 cup sherry wine, 1/2 ounce Cooper's gelatin soaked in a cup of cold water 2 hours, 1 teaspoonful vanilla or bitter almond extract, 3 eggs, whites and yolks beaten together but very light, 1 pint milk, 1 cup sugar. Heat the cream almost to boiling, put in the soaked gelatin and half a cup of sugar, and stir until dissolved. Remove from the fire, flavor, and when cool, beat or churn to a standing froth. Cut off the top of the cake in one piece and scoop out the middle, leaving the sides and bottom 3/4 of an inch thick. Over the inside of these pour the wine in spoonfuls, that all may be evenly moistened. Fill with the whipped cream, replace the top, which should also be moistened with wine, and set in a cold place until needed. Serve with it, or pour around it, a custard made of the eggs, milk, and the other half cup of sugar. Chocolate Charlotte Russe. 1/2 ounce Cooper's gelatin, soaked in a very little cold water. 3 tablespoonfuls grated chocolate, rubbed smooth in a little milk. 1/2 cup powdered sugar. 4 eggs. 1/2 pound sponge cake. 1 teaspoonful vanilla. 1 pint cream. Heat the cream to boiling. Slowly stirring frequently, add the sugar, chocolate, and gelatin, and when these are dissolved, add, a spoonful at a time, to the beaten yolks. Set back in the saucepan of boiling water and stir 5 minutes, until very hot, but do not let it boil off. Take it off, flavor, and whip or churn to a standing froth, adding the beaten whites toward the last. Line a mould with cake, fill with the mixture, and set upon the ice. Flummery. 2 ounces almonds, a few bitter among them, 1 tablespoon orange flower or rose water, 1 pint cream, 1 ounce Cooper's gelatin, soaked 1 hour in 1 cup cold water, 1 cup milk, half cup sugar. Blanch the almonds, and when cold, pound them to a paste in a Wedgwood mortar, adding orange flower or rose water to prevent oiling. Heat the milk to boiling, put in the gelatin, the sugar, and almonds, and stir 5 minutes, or until they are thoroughly dissolved. Strain through thin muslin, pressing the cloth well. When cool, beat in the cream, a little at a time, with an egg whip, or churn in a syllabub churn until thick and stiff. Wet your mould, put in the mixture, and let it stand 7 or 8 hours in a cold place. Gelatine Charlotte Russe. Very nice. 1 pint of cream, whipped light, 1/2 ounce gelatin, dissolved in 1 gill of hot milk. Whites of 2 eggs, beaten to a stiff froth. 1 small teacup of powdered sugar. Flavor with bitter almond and vanilla. Mix the cream, eggs, and sugar. Flavor and beat in the gelatin and milk last. It should be quite cold before it is added. Line a mould with slices of sponge cake or with ladies' fingers, and fill with the mixture. Set upon the ice to cool. Whipped syllabubs. 1 pint of cream, rich and sweet, 1/2 cup sugar, powdered, 1 glass of wine, vanilla or other extract, 1 large teaspoonful. Sweeten the cream, and, when the sugar is thoroughly dissolved, churn to a strong froth. Lastly, stir in wine and seasoning carefully. Serve at once. Heap in glasses and eat with cake. Gooseberry Fool. 1 quart of gooseberries ripe, 1 tablespoonful butter, 1 cup of sugar, yolks of 4 eggs, meringue of whites, and 3 tablespoonfuls sugar. Stew the gooseberries in just water enough to cover them. When soft and broken, rub them through a sieve to remove the skins. While still hot, beat in the butter, sugar, and the whipped yolks of the eggs. Pile in a glass dish or in small glasses, and heap upon the top a meringue of the whipped whites and sugar. Cream meringues. 4 eggs, the whites only, whipped stiff, with 1 pound powdered sugar, lemon or vanilla flavoring, 1 teaspoonful arrowroot. When very stiff, heap in the shape of half an egg upon stiff letter paper lining the bottom of your baking pan. Have them half an inch apart. Do not shut the oven door closely, but leave a space through which you can watch them. When they are light yellow brown, take them out and cool quickly. Slip a thin-bladed knife under each, scoop out the soft inside, and fill with cream whipped as for Charlotte Russe. They are very fine. The oven should be very hot. Calf's foot jelly. 4 calf's feet cleaned carefully, 4 quarts of water, 1 pint of wine, 3 cups of sugar, or sweetened to taste, whites of 3 eggs well beaten, 2 teaspoonfuls of nutmeg, juice of 1 lemon, and half the grated peel. Boil the calf's feet in the water until it is reduced 1/2. Strain the liquor and let it stand 10 to 12 hours. Skim off every particle of the fat and remove the dregs. Melt slowly in a porcelain or bell metal kettle. Add the seasoning, sugar, and the whipped whites of the eggs, and boil fast about 12 minutes, skimming well. Strain through a double flannel bag suspended between the 4 legs of an upturned high stool or backless chair, the bowl set beneath. Do not squeeze or shake it until the jelly ceases to run freely. Then slip out the bowl and put under another, into which you may gently press what remains. The first will be the clearer jelly, although the second dripping will taste quite as well. Wet your moulds, put in the jelly, and set in a cool place. There are still some housekeepers who insist that the jellies made from the modern gelatine are not comparable in beauty and flavor to those prepared from the genuine feet. Seeing means taste as well as belief with them, and when they handle and behold the beloved feet, they know what they are about. Gelatine, they will darkly and disgustfully assert, is made of horn shavings and hoofs and the like, and no more fit to be used for cooking purposes than so much glue. Nevertheless, while gelatine is so clean, bright, and convenient, housewives who find the days now but half as long as did their mothers, despite labor-saving machines, will turn a deaf ear to these alarmists and escape the tedious process above described by using the valuable substitute. Wine jelly. 3 cups of sugar, 1 pint of wine, pale sherry or white, 1 cup of cold water, 1 package Cox's gelatine, juice of 2 lemons and grated peel of 1, 1 quart of boiling water, 1 good pinch of cinnamon. Soak the gelatine in the cold water 1 hour. Add to this the sugar, lemons, and cinnamon. Pour over all a quart of boiling water and stir until the gelatine is thoroughly dissolved. Put in the wine, strain through a double flannel bag without squeezing. Wet your moulds with cold water and set the jelly away in them to cool. Cider jelly may be made by the receipt just given, substituting a pint of clear sweet cider for the wine. Fever patients may use cider jelly when wine is forbidden, and they will find this both refreshing and nutritious. Bird's nest in jelly. 1 quart of jelly, made according to either of the receipts just given, but with a cup less of boiling water, that it may be very firm. 3 cups of white blanc mange, 9 empty eggshells, fresh rinds of 2 oranges, 1 cup of sugar. Cut the rind from the oranges in long narrow strips, and stew these gently in enough water to cover them until they are tender. Add to them a cup of sugar, and simmer 15 minutes longer in the syrup. Lay them out upon a dish to cool, taking care not to break them. If you have preserved orange peel in the house, it will save you the trouble of preparing this. The blancmange should be made the day before you want it, and the egg shells filled. The original contents, yolk and white, should be poured out through a hole, not larger than a half dime, in the small end, and the interior washed with pure water, shaken around well in them. Then fill with blancmange and set in a pan of flour or sugar, the open end up, that they may not be jostled or overturned. Next morning fill a glass dish 2/3 full of the jelly, which should be very clear, reserving a large cupful. Break the shells from about the blancmange, and lay the artificial eggs upon the jelly so soon as the latter is firm enough to bear them. Pile them neatly, but not too high in the middle, bearing in mind that what is the top now will be the bottom when the jelly is turned out. Lay the orange peel, which represents straw, over these and around them. Warm the reserved jelly so that it will flow readily, but do not get it hot. Pour over the straw and eggs, and set away in a cold place to form. When firm, turn out upon a glass dish or salver. This pretty and fanciful dish is yet easily made. The materials are so simple and inexpensive, and the effect of the work, if deftly done, so pleasing, that I have no hesitation in calling the attention even of novices to it. Wine jelly, boiled. 1 box Cox's gelatine, soaked in 1 pint of cold water 1 hour. 1 quart of boiling water poured over this, and stirred until the gelatine is dissolved. 1 1/2 pound white sugar. 2 lemons, juice and peel. 1 pint of wine. Put all over the fire, boil up once well, and strain through a double flannel bag into moulds. Orange jelly. 2 oranges, juice of both and grated rind of 1. 1 lemon, juice and peel. 1 package Cox's gelatine, soaked in a very little water 1 hour. 1 quart boiling water. 1 1/2 cup sugar, and 1 small cup of wine. 1 good pinch of cinnamon. Squeeze the juice of the fruit into a bowl, and put with them the grated peel and the cinnamon. Pour over them the boiling water, cover closely, and let stand half an hour. Strain, add the sugar, let it come to a boil, stir in the gelatine, and, when this is well dissolved, take the saucepan from the fire. Strain through a double flannel bag into moulds. Variegated jelly. 1 quart of clear jelly, 1/2 teaspoonful prepared cochineal or red currant juice, 1 cup white blancmange. Divide the jelly into 2 equal portions, and color one with a very little prepared cochineal, leaving the other as it is, of a pale amber. Wet a mould with cold water, and pour in a little of the latter. Set the mould in the ice, that the jelly may harden quickly, and so soon as it is firm, pour in carefully some of the red. Set back upon the ice to get ready for the amber, adding the 2 colors in this order until you are ready for the base, which should be whiter than the other stripes, and consist of the white blancmange. Keep both jelly and blancmange near the fire until you have filled the mould. I mean, of course, that intended for the latest layers. Let all get very firm before you turn it out. You may vary 2 moulds of this jelly by having the blancmange base of one colored with chocolate, a narrow white stripe above relieving the grave effect of the brown. End of section 44.